I myself, the producer of this podcast, is not eligible to diagnose anyone with a mental health disorder. This podcast is purely for artists discussing the mental health hurdles they struggle with on a daily basis. Enjoy. Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Where's My Mind, a podcast about mental health and the arts. And today I have a writer, performer based out of New York, who I met via Facebook. Like I've mentioned before in a few of these episodes you may have heard already. I posted these specific topics on like film friendly or acting Facebook groups. I've had a lot of people reach out, and she's one of them, Ashley Griffin. How are you today, Ashley?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem, no problem. And like, I know I am repeating myself in these episodes, but I'm assuming, I treat every episode as if this is the first episode people are listening to. This is the episodes I'm doing with Ashley are topics she came up with based off of the list I gave her, and I think they're really, both of them are very important to talk about, especially this one because I think we've been dealing with it. It's kind of this is a topic that we've been dealing with for years, but finally came to the light. I want to say maybe 6-7 years ago. And if my timeline is off, I apologize. But Ashley wanted to discuss, dealing with the effects of abuse in the industry. Was there something specific about this, like this topic, you really want to talk about? Is it something that you've seen a lot on set? You've dealt with yourself? Was it something like the Me Too movement that just was like, you know what, fuck it, I just want to start talking about this stuff more?
I hate that the statistic is true, and it's true. I mean, it's true for men and women. I think the numbers are just higher for women. There's probably not a woman in the industry who doesn't have some story to a greater or lesser degree about something, and certainly men do too. There's horrible
Yeah.
things that happen to men. It's interesting for me being on both sides of the table, as it were, because I'm both a performer and a writer director. So I've seen things happen sort of from both sides. And I feel like there's a great conversation that started to happen, like you said, like with the Me Too movement, um, about the fact that it happens. But I feel like what hasn't really been talked about is then what the long-term effects are and how that continues to play out. It's
Yeah.
like it's one thing to start the conversation, which is hugely needed, and I'm very grateful that it's there of, like this thing happened to me, that's horrible. We need to make sure that that thing does not happen. But what about all the instances where like it has happened and people have had to continue to work with that person, or a blind eye has been turned, or you have experienced some assault or abuse in a certain way and you have to keep going back into that situation. Um, there are really famous stories about, say, for example, this is one of many things that could happen, somebody being in a play that involves an assault scene and there's somebody who really crossed a line with it. Well, then what happens if, even if that person is gone, they have to keep doing that same scene 8 times a week? There's a
Yeah.
lot of like little tendrils of this issue that I think are long term that I haven't really seen discussed. So that was just sort of an area that I thought maybe could use an opening conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that you, right, as of now, you're the only one who has kind of, I'll say, stepped up and want to discuss something like this. Um, and it's not easy to talk about, like, at all, in my opinion, because I start going back in my head and was like, have I ever said things or done things that not done things, but said things that might come off very like you said. Most of the time, most women have come across some sort of abuse, verbal, physical, within the industry. So is there something like when I was, coming up as a filmmaker 10, 12 years ago, and I was thinking this, I was like this hot shit 24-year-old director. Would I say anything, or would I even say something to my friends, a fucked up joke, let's say, around cast and crew, and then they're like, oh, this behaviors, I'm not, it's every little thing, honestly, like it is every little thing. So um I, and it's tough, and I know there's been a lot of trauma from the Me Too movement, but do you, how, how do you think it's how do you think it's benefited the industry moving forward since then?
I mean, the biggest thing is it's easier to have the conversation. I think before the Me Too movement, there was definitely a big feeling of maybe it's just me, maybe this just happened to me. If I say anything, my career's on the line. Um, so I don't know. I need to maybe just sort of deal with it on my own. And now I feel like there's more freedom to speak up and know that you have allies and know that you're not alone in this. And hopefully that it will not affect your job to do so. I mean, that's obviously a question since time immemorial and will always be a difficult topic. But I feel like the conversation has been opened a bit, which is wonderful. And I see other little things happening. Like intimacy directors are now like that's a profession now that you can have, which is wonderful. And I love my intimacy directors, and that's been on more and more sets and in rehearsal studios, and that's wonderful. And things like that are definitely happening.
Yeah.
But there is a certain line that I feel like we haven't necessarily gotten to the other side of yet.
And what do you think that line is?
Um, Really putting survivors above profit at the end of the day. Um, is the thing that is probably the most challenging in all of this in some ways, and is the thing I still see a lot of things kind of brushed under the rug of like, "Oh, we acknowledge that, and, like, that I'm so sorry that that happened to you, but, this person has a contract, and, like, I'm sure it won't happen again," and, like, that stuff still
Yeah.
tends to happen, and also not looking. I think there's not really an understanding that when this kind of thing happens, it's a long-term thing. It's not as short and sweet as, like, an incident being over. Like, "Oh, that was bad. It's over. Let's move forward." It definitely bleeds into a lot of other things, and I don't really see that part of conversation happening yet.
Or yeah, or this was reported for a few weeks, a few months, a day or two, and then it is kind of lost in the shuffle of everything else because that's just how the world is, where it's forever changing. But the women, the men who were abused, has a lifetime of pain. And a thing that I talked to like my mom about with this, and she's an artist. She's not an actress, she's not a screen, television, or theater artist per se, but she's an artist in her own right. And she's like, the main thing out of all of this is that we're forgetting about the women and men, primarily the women in the Me Too movement, but the women in this that refused to do X, Y, and Z, and then got blackballed from the industry. That's to me is the most overshadowed part of it. You stand up for what you believed in. You stood up for yourself, and then you have this monster. Your career's done, and it's just like I can't imagine anyone who like went away because of that, and then like I said, this movement happened, and then if I was in any other position, like any of those women's shoes, like I wouldn't want to come back to the industry, an industry that rejected me, that didn't save me, you know.
And then it also becomes for all women, and men, how do you then navigate moving forward? Because I mean, here's like just as a tiny example, obviously we all know the horrible things that Harvey Weinstein did. And a lot of those incidents started with Harvey wants to have a meeting with you in his hotel room. And,
A one-on-one
obviously
meeting, yeah.
one-on-one meeting. Now, yes, of course, it's in all of our, sort of after school special brains of like, you don't go up to somebody's hotel room one-on-one. The truth in the industry is that's kind of the standard in a lot of situations. And the thing is, you never know what you're walking into. I have walked into meetings where it's just a one-on-one meeting, and I haven't ever had a meeting in a hotel room, but sometimes it's been like, oh, a home office or, home amenities or something like
Yeah.
that. And there's always that question of, are you walking into a Harvey Weinstein situation or a totally innocent situation? A lot of those meetings I've walked into have been 100% very innocent situations where legitimately it's an office, they're booked with meetings all day. You sit down, you have your meeting, and it's great. So it then becomes like, well, how do you navigate it? Do you then say no to any important person that wants to meet you?
That
Well,
really, yeah, that could affect you mentally. That
yeah, like
not could,
you,
it does affect you
yeah,
mentally.
like you can't really you can't just say I'm never going to meet with any of these people alone, because just in a practical way it's not how the industry works. Now that's a whole other question of whether or not it should work that way. But then every so often you do walk into a terrible situation, and then so there's little things like that that it's then forevermore anytime you get a meeting, in the back of your mind, you're questioning, "Is this going to be just a very legitimate thing, or is this gonna, like, destroy my life and career?" And that shouldn't be a question that we have every single time, like, a meeting comes up. So
Mhm.
these are the kinds of things that I think need to be addressed.
No, that's and to if you don't mind me speaking from the other side of that, in this the male's perspective, there's been a few times I've done these interviews in person with an actress. I've gone to their apartment. I've because I record out of my apartment here, obviously in my studio. But if I am recording someone in my apartment, I'll do it in my like living room area, you know. And or I have gone, like I said, I've gone to other people's apartments or their safe space, in the back of my mind. And I know this, and I'm not trying to make jokes of it or anything like that, but I wonder if like they don't really know me, like how am I gonna have to come off very non-threatening? Like I'm 6'1", I'm pushing I'm closer to 300 than lower, I'm a big guy. um so it's all about someone feel how do you make someone feel safe, right? And I know this might sound silly, even like with COVID, like I'll show up and I'll wear a mask, and they say, "Oh, you don't have to." I'm like, okay, like I go into every situation being like, like try to be the least threatening person at all, and it's
Well, let's just acknowledge, like, thank you for doing that, because the mere fact that you are valuing that is really huge.
and I'm not the only guy who is value who and we're not. I'm not looking for like praise. It's just it is what guys think about too, because
Oh, and but I think that that should be acknowledged for anybody that is thinking that way, because I mean that's, I think that just on a person to person human level, that's one real way that we can make a step forward, is if everybody's not out of like fear, but in a
yeah.
way of like we care about other people, how can we, make this a safe.
Yeah, and I'll never be like, "Oh, the elephant in the room." Like, I'll never do that because you bring attention to it, like, and the woman could be like, "I wasn't even thinking that, dude." Like, what the, But like, in my mind, I'm like, I know this is a very, one on one. Like I said, most of the fact is I don't know some of these people I'm going to interview. Now, if it's a friend of mine I'm interviewing and I've known her, let's say, for a while, I'm still not going to ever cross that boundary. Like, hey, like hug or whatever. Like, I don't initiate hugs. I don't initiate any of that. I'm very handshake, and it's not like, oh, I'm covering my ass. It's just there was just a really, and I hate talking about him the most because he is such a big, like, he's just a monster, honestly. But like the stories that Weinstein did, and you have movies like Bombshell at Fox News and things of that nature. Like, there's been so many men who've put like lasting damage in every woman's brain, and this isn't just an artist or film problem. This is a working everyday problem. Um so you try to, for me, it's you I try to look at it as how as a guy can I, there's that balance of like, when I was single, like what can be misconstrued, how do you flirt, how you do that, but at the same time it's just like, why don't you just be yourself, and re- women, employees, people in general will take you for what you are. And I think it's very important.
Yeah. And I also just want to throw out and acknowledge that men experience this too. And like just as one example, all the stuff that happened with Kevin Spacey and
Yeah,
um, Anthony Rapp. I don't know Anthony, but we are sort of like 1 degree of separation in the Broadway world and whatnot. And
that's awesome.
that happens, and that's almost, I think, sometimes more difficult to talk about because there's this assumption that abuse doesn't happen to men in the same way it does to women, and it's like that's very not true. So I think it's something that for all of us to be to be aware of
Exactly.
with anybody that we come in contact.
Yeah, and that kind of transition to my next question is, within the industry, what are some types of abuse that are overshadowed? Of course, you have the main one, that's physical abuse. And you're saying, men also do get abused. So what are types of abuse that you have witnessed, or that you are not, you're knowledgeable of, or that unfortunately maybe you have gone through in your career?
Yeah. No, I've definitely gone through stuff, and I hate to say it, but pretty much everybody I know has gone through stuff, and they range in scale, I guess. I mean, anything is terrible, but they range in scale, in terms of, I guess, how what the experience was.
Intensity, yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with a power dynamic. Um, a lot of it has to do with not being understanding or respectful of what safe boundaries are within a theatrical workplace. And yeah, and I think again, like I said, power dynamic has a lot to do with it. I know about everything from somebody on the production team in under the guise of like helping somebody with something they're singing or whatnot, getting really, really close and like touching their neck and kissing them and things, and then it being brushed off as like, oh no, I was just looking over your shoulder, like you're reading too much into it, to flat out being asked out on a date and saying, if you don't go out with me, I will blacklist you and you'll never go out with anybody again. I know situations of people who have been cast opposite somebody who is a sexual predator, like literally has been arrested and gone to jail for it, but like now they've, that their time is over, so, there should theoretically be no issues. Um, I know of, people that were groomed, that started as fans from a young age that were groomed by, a well-known person in the industry under very false pretenses. I know of situations where there is an intimate or even violent scenario on stage where that's been taken advantage of, for personal enjoyment by somebody in a scene. I've kind of heard about or experienced like the gamut of these things. Um, and and yeah, a lot of it is either kind of brushed aside as, "Oh, you misunderstood," or, "Well, we're all family and it's theater and yeah, don't we all give each other back rubs," kind of a thing, to, "Well, this person's a really important person, and we think that they've learned a lesson, and so we all just need to kind of shut up and move on." And it's sort of all for in the interest of just moving the thing forward and getting on with it and not really legitimizing the person's experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a it's such a deep rooted issue that you're bringing up things that you know it can go from, yeah, performing a sex scene in a movie, or like a really intense altercation on set, on stage, and it's all about having that, between the actors, like what with acting. I feel like it's just trust. The number one thing is trust, having to trust your partner, or your scene partner, your cast and crew members. And if things are very uncomfortable, we have to make sure, like, to me, there always has to be like double triple checking, like, are you sure you're okay with this, like, are you positive from a director standpoint, because you say you produce, you write, you direct. um how have you navigated through this since the Me Too movement? Do you write stuff, or do you produce stuff that do you avoid certain things, or do you, if there is a scene that is necessary, do you have like a wellness coach on set or a therapist on set? Like, how have you navigated it from a director writer perspective?
In a great advantageous place in the sense that because I am on both sides of the table, there are times when I can advocate in a way that other people might not be able to. Um, and I do create things and I have been in pieces that deal with very dark themes. And I
Mhm.
I love exploring those things when for a piece that I think has something really beautiful and important to say. And the way I've always dealt with it is I found that the best sort of solution for all of these for a lot of these things is really good, honest, open communication, ideally in a situation where no is a full sentence and it's completely accepted and that's a safe thing to say.
Mhm.
When I am a writer director, always want to have, a fight choreographer, intimacy director on set, in the rehearsal room. If it's my job to be leading the room, I always start with a conversation about, consent in all directions is very important. If you aren't comfortable with anything, that is great. I want you to speak up, and also continuing to check in with people as things happen. And I sort of just decided that I was going to um behave, not in terms of leading a room, but in terms of navigating those consensual waters, that I was going to behave in the same way as a performer. So, for example, there have been times as a performer that I've been called in to like a final callback, and it's a scene that requires some intimacy. And the director has been like, "Great, here's your partner. Like, if you guys could just do it." And I'll stop and I'll like go to my partner and be like, "Hi, my name's Ashley. It's really nice to meet you. Just want to touch base. These are the things that it says in the scene. Is there anything that you're not comfortable with? Are there things that you would prefer that we don't do physically right now? Is there any way, of being touched that you're not comfortable with?" And usually what ends up happening, which I think is also interesting because most of the stuff I get called in for, I'm usually in that situation with a male scene partner. They'll usually sort of breathe a sigh of relief and be like, "Oh, thank God that you brought that up and said that." Um, and sometimes it's not always welcome, but I would rather do that than, suddenly jump on a scene partner and start making out with them when like
Yeah.
neither of us are necessarily comfortable with that. And I think a really positive example that I had recently is I've been in development for a new piece of mine that I'm performing in, and the team is one of the most phenomenal teams I've ever worked with on a show. It's a two-hander piece. The actor that I was working with, I've known for a long time. And there is intimacy involved in it. And starting right at the get-go with a single stage direction where all that was supposed to happen was like I was supposed to touch their shoulders. I literally just turned and was like, "Hey, is it cool with you if I touch your shoulders right now?" And there was a little bit of laughter or whatnot. We obviously knew each other. So, my theoretical assumption would be this is fine, but we're still in a professional setting. We're still doing a piece that's going to get more and more intense. And I asked, and they then had the ability to say yes or no. And then that gave them permission that when they needed to touch me, they turned to me and said, "Is this okay? Is there any way that you're not comfortable?" And it was sort of actually a really joyous moment in the room that opened up a lot of trust, that opened up a lot of safety. It was advantageous to the piece. I'll speak for me. I felt more comfortable going to certain places because I knew that if I was ever uncomfortable, I could say no, and that would be completely respected. And so that's one thing I think can be really helpful um, in a room, and something that I always try to advocate for.
Yeah, no, that's well, kudos to you, like kind of like breaking that tension at first. Because it
I know I have not gotten the part because I've opened that conversation, and they just sort of want somebody who can just do it and not and kind of shut up about it, to be honest. But I'm like, I'd rather not get a role and have both of us feel safe and comfortable than walk out of there and have either of us feel uncomfortable. And also, like, if that's how an audition is being handled, I don't want to know what's going to happen on set.
exactly. And listen, there are certain things I want actors and actresses to do. Like, I've had people not do one of my projects because there was cursing in it. Okay, if you really don't curse, then then I don't mind going back and rewriting. You know, and maybe this is a bad thing. Just because I would almost do anything on a film set as an actor doesn't mean everyone else is that way, right? So there's that one, but two, if you're not going to get a role because you won't, I don't know, kiss or I don't know. I don't even want to say it out loud. Like just the weird shit that maybe some casting directors or directors do. Like you just said, if it's this uncomfortable and kind of ornery in audition, I can't imagine what set would be like. So there are, like silver linings with certain things because all right, I didn't get roles because X, Y, and Z, but like are these my type of people? Would I really want to do that?
Yeah.
Um,
So sorry, there's like somebody doing some sort of trimming of some
I hear nothing.
plants outside. Oh, great.
Yeah, I hear
Um,
absolutely nothing.
I also just wanted to clarify, I am a big advocate for, like, reading a script beforehand,
Oh,
and
yeah,
you
yeah.
see what's in there, and if you're uncomfortable with something, then you don't go out for the job. So when I go in and audition for something, it's with me being comfortable with whatever I would be required to do in that film, but I'm not going to do it without getting the consent of the other actor in the audition room. Like, we're not even talking about not being comfortable doing something that's in the script. It's merely asking for consent of the other scene partner that sometimes ruffles feathers. And
That's even crazier to me, in my opinion. That's even crazier to me because you're you're just making sure the your potential co-star, or even just a fellow actor, is okay with doing this. And for anyone to ever have pushback on that, that's what's weird. It's like it kind of seems like, and like I said, I'm a very low level filmmaker. I've done independent, never met anyone famous, never been on like a Netflix production, never done background, like, so I guess I'm just speaking from a very independent level. If someone's morals aren't right on an independent level, I can't imagine how the lack of people's morals are on bigger sets, because you said it earlier in this episode, it's financial burden versus someone's mental burden, the bigger projects, you're going to sink a lot of money into it, you might lose or gain some, but like, oh, this movie's going to make millions, suck it up, buttercup. Well, you don't need to hear that. No one needs to hear that shit, in my opinion. So people, on such a small level where I'm at, like, there's not a lot of the moral compass of some of these producers I've seen and I've heard of is like horrifying. So I was like, I can't imagine how it is on a grander scale.
yeah, well, and I'm being asked to improvise intimate things in a show or on a film set, or something being sprung at you that was never disclosed before, are other things that, I mean, those are just simple things. It's like, just talk to somebody about it ahead of time, you know?
Yeah, I think if you're going to write something, two characters having sex, or it being a very intimate scene, I think personally, me as someone who loves writing, that's not something you kind of just spring up on someone, because it's kind of a weird, dirty move, in my opinion. Like, if you're,
Violence in pieces as well. I mean, I come from a really strong dance background and a stage combat background, and it's really remarkable what you can do and what you can make real. If you know what you're doing. But the amount of times I've also been in a situation where it's like, no, just like throw them against the wall, or oh, I went off of our fight choreography because I was just feeling it. It's like, it also, just on a practical level, it makes the piece worse because then there's no acting going on. It's just people sort of randomly winging something and one person being terrified.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, and also the other thing is, and I don't want the thing is, I don't want anybody necessarily, well, I mean, maybe like a Harvey Weinstein, but like, I don't theoretically want anybody blacklisted, or, I cancel culture. I have, some issues with accountability culture. I'm a huge advocate for, but there seems to be this thing that it kind of almost doesn't matter what somebody's track record or history is. They just kind of keep getting hired. And I don't know. I do think that there needs to be some sort of accountability, however that's best done, of if somebody has proven to be a dangerous person in whatever capacity that is, you know, maybe let's not keep giving them a free pass until like there has actually been some accountability and some movement forward. Um, that's another thing that I think could be looked at.
I love that. I love that answer, that comment. I do, because yeah, cancel culture is, people think, oh, there's no cancel culture, X, Y, and Z. Like, there's a good mixture of it, but accountability culture, that's the first time I've ever heard of that. I think that needs to be, um, more, I guess, normalized than cancel culture. A good example, I don't want to talk about too much because who knows when this episode, like I said, is coming out and all that, but the incident at the Oscars between Will Smith and Chris Rock, like, that's a good example of we should see some accountability culture versus cancel. And what happened, where's the fine line? Like, cancel, like, are you going to fire him from all his jobs? No, but there should be some sort of accountability. He removed himself from the Oscars, and I'm not saying take away his awards, because then you'd have to take away Weinstein's awards and Roman Polanski's awards and whatnot. But I don't think he should really be allowed back in that setting, because he just the unprofessionalism. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that too. I think if someone is well known for being unprofessional, now
Yeah.
You know,
Well, here's a good practical example with that. With what happened with Will Smith. Now, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Certainly, nobody cares whatsoever what my personal opinion about it is. Although the short answer is, I don't think violence is the answer, even though that was a terrible moment and a bad joke. Um, but regardless of his standing in the academy, regardless of any awards or anything else, let's put it in these terms. If you were a performer and you were now, like right now, cast in a film opposite Will Smith that involved a violent action scene, wouldn't it at least cross the back of your mind after watching that incident? Oh shit, what if he gets really angry on set and goes too far? Those are the kind of situations we shouldn't be putting people in.
yeah,
Um, and until something is addressed, until people like legitimately like would feel safe, it's these are the kinds of things that I think we need to be thinking about in terms of what the
accountability.
longer, yeah, in terms of what the longer term fallout is for the mental well-being of the other people that might be involved in any of these given situations.
Because a film set, theater, I've never done theater. I don't know what it is like. I'm assuming it's chaos. That's where I was going with it. Like, there's always so much chaos and like I don't want to say tension on a set, but it's very like depending on the subject matter, nerves are someone is always someone is always high strung with nerves. Producer or AD trying to get things done on time. If it's a serious, intense topic, it's the characters getting into the right mind frame and being like, "Holy shit!" Like, this is an intense scene coming up. It's already high tension, and then you throw in someone who has had an outburst publicly, much such like Will Smith did. Yeah, that's going to just add to it. And why would anyone want to? Although Will Smith is a massive name, why would anyone want to deal with that drama that comes with him now? So
You
Well,
make
one of the big differences with theater, I mean, with film, it's sort of real intensity until you get the shot, and then you never have to do that scene again, kind of a thing. So it's maybe like a couple hours of real intensity, and then the moment's over.
yeah,
In theater, you're doing that scene 8 times a week,
yeah,
and you keep having to go back and doing it. So they're both they both can be potentially really challenging situations in different ways. Um, in film, if you're dealing with somebody who's maybe being inappropriate, you have to deal with them being like really wacky and inappropriate for an intense amount of time. On stage, you have to deal with the fear 8 times a week of, oh God, are they going to do that thing again tonight?
yeah.
And those are both not good situations that need to be addressed. Yeah, for different reasons, slightly.
yeah. Final two questions here. I feel like they're coming from a writer's director standpoint and then an actress or actor standpoint. Um, how could someone move on? It's tough to move on, but I guess let's say how could someone learn to live with the effects that they have to deal from the abuse? Um,
It's a really challenging one to answer because the truth is the answer will probably be different for any given person. Um, I think the the first thing I would say is talk to someone. If it's a therapist, I mean, therapy is a wonderful, wonderful tool. If you have access to that and if you feel comfortable with that, if not, anybody that you feel safe with to talk about what happened, just so you don't feel alone and you feel like you have somebody on your side, I think is really important. Um, and then I think, gosh, trying to figure out an answer in like a 30-second easy answer.
oh no, you you can go on if you need to. It's fine.
I guess what I would say from personal experience is, first of all, it's okay to acknowledge that this may not ever be something that you get over in that sense of like,
It's
oh, I'm fine now.
It's like dealing with any trauma. Like you want to take art out of it. It's like dealing with a trauma based thing, as much as a family member, friend passing away or something heavy. Yeah, it's and people say it, and I know it sounds cliche, but like when someone passes away or dies, you never get over it. You just learn to live with it, and that's what I'm saying. I didn't want to say like move on because you'll never move on. No, 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 no. I know you're not, but I'm just saying like I just wanted to clarify in the question even before I asked you that, like, I'm not telling people, oh, move on from this, like it's time to get over it, because it's not. It's really not, because if it's pushed in your face and if it's happening on every set, like how the hell can you move on from it? So yeah, it's like, and I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm just saying it's very much like a trauma. It's like a trauma you would deal with any other type of in your life.
Absolutely. And I think that something that can be helpful is one of the things that is traumatizing about a lot of these situations is within them, you've kind of completely had your power taken away when these things happen. Um, it's scary because you were powerless to stop a really bad thing from happening. And something that I think can be helpful is there's a really great quote, and I can't remember the name of the person that said it. It's somebody who survived the Holocaust, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of everything in life can be taken away from you except for this one thing: your choice about how to um, deal with the situation that you find yourself in.
Mhm.
And I just totally butchered that. I apologize, but the sentiment I think is even if your only power in the situation is how you're going to move forward with it, take that power, take any power that you possibly can. And I think it's important to acknowledge how am I feeling about this? What are my triggers with this? And really think about all these things and like they're all fine and they're okay. Nothing is bad or wrong about them. It's just it's good to acknowledge them and then figuring out for yourself and taking your power back of what do I need to do in any given situation to be comfortable? And that could be a myriad of things. It could be, you know what? I can never work with this person again. Awesome. You're never going to work with that person again. And that's going to be really helpful. Or I can't be in this situation, or I'm going to go back in that situation and I'm going to reclaim it. And I think that that's different for everybody, but really thinking through, first of all, really understanding how you're feeling, what is triggering you, and acknowledging those um, as honestly as fine things that your body and your mind are trying to use to protect you. And, you know, acknowledging them in a positive way, and then making decisions for yourself about what would make you the most comfortable moving forward. And that could change from day to day, minute to minute, and allowing that to be okay. And I think that those are some things that can be helpful to start thinking about if you've dealt with any of these kind of situations.
I love that answer. Love it. I guess, and the the final question I have for you for this episode is, from a writer, what are some tips or suggestions some producers and directors could do to make one's dealing with post set abuse like more comfortable on set? So if you want to speak from both sides, you can, but I would just love to hear kind of your thoughts on like the best way to make just a very just overall like awesome vibe on set, a comfortable vibe. What are some ways, like as if you were speaking to a young filmmaker who isn't really knowledgeable in this, what would you say to them?
I think openness and communication, first of all, are really important. Even if it feels like you're even if you feel like you might be saying things that are redundant or like go without saying, like say them anyway and do everything you can to create a safe space, not just in what you say, but in your actions. So, and I think that starts with, first of all, if you're dealing with a script that deals with any dark or controversial issues, make that clear from moment one. The number of situations I've seen where people don't even get together sides to send to actors until like less than 12 hours before the audition. I know sometimes crazy things happen, but like
Yeah.
the more you can be prepared, like the better it's going to be for everybody. So like for example, if I am the writer or director of a project that deals with darker subject matter, I tell the casting director, anybody that like an audition slot goes out to, send them these sides, send them the script. I mean, sometimes the writer doesn't want the whole script to go out for various reasons. I'm an advocate for it. It's only giving more information to these folks. Spell out any potential things, like just we want to draw your attention to the fact that there are the following scenes and this is how we plan to deal with it in the filming or rehearsal process. If you are uncomfortable with any of these things, we totally understand. We're happy to either have a conversation, or if you feel that this is not the right piece for you, that's totally fine. Like give them all the information as early as possible. Do not make anybody do anything in the rehearsal room that you haven't prepped them for, that you haven't talked to them about. Um, things like that. And then first thing on a set is, let's like bring out the elephant in the room of like, hey, so this is a darker piece, these are some of the things that we're dealing with. I mean, I know in film specifically you don't get much rehearsal, but I think at least some sort of table reader group conversation is in order.
Yeah.
Lay out your steps for making this comfortable. Hey, we have an intimacy director on set, this is them, here's their information, feel free to talk to them about anything and everything. Establish a vibe on set of like, no is a full answer. We trust all of you. We're very happy to have you here. We want you to be honest and upfront with us. And then, continue that in the way things are done when things are being staged. Ask for consent with everything that happens. Again, it might be silly if somebody needs to like take someone's elbow, but like, you never know. And it also just, if nothing else, it opens up the atmosphere to like any and all conversations are okay. Like, are you okay having them take your elbow right now? D- just it might sound silly, but it does engender a nicer vibe on set. If you're creating an atmosphere where you're saying, "Please come talk to me with any issues," be prepared for people to do that, and when they do that, listen to them, believe them, and don't brush them off, and make your number one priority making them feel safe. Um, Express that if anybody has anything they want to talk about, you're open. If they don't want to talk about anything, that's fine too. But anything and everything is on the table. And then deal with all of these issues as professionally as you can. Treat them as choreography. Um, if somebody has behaved improperly on your set, don't jump to the like, okay, I guess we'll have mediation, or I told them not to do it again and like it's fine. Like, figure out what needs to happen for everybody involved to feel safe. Um, and just sort of lead by example. And I think empathy goes a really long way. And if you I always think about, if you're in a leadership position, that does not mean that you are the star and it's ego driven and you have the most power, so isn't that neat? I find that the most things go wrong when that's the attitude. I think that the more power you have and the more you're in a leadership position, the more you need to be in service of everybody else, and your job is to help everybody else to do their job the best that they can. It's not about you, it's not about your ego, it's about you being there to support your team members. And so the more empathy you can treat any situation of, shoot, if I was in this situation, how would I be feeling right now?
Yeah.
Um, that's just going to create a much better atmosphere on set. And it's going to benefit everyone in the long run, because when you have trust, like real trust, people's performances and people's work it's just going to be deeper and it's going to be better, and they're going to want to work with you again. So in general, I would say open communication, lead with empathy, um, and believe people and listen when things have happened. Um, for any reason. I mean, some nothing may have happened on your set, but somebody may come forward and be like, "Hey, I had a really bad incident on another set with this kind of fake punch. Is there any way that we could do something different?" That has nothing to do with you. You did nothing wrong, but like, yeah, I'm really glad my actor came and told me that. Let's figure
Yeah.
out a different way to do that. So I guess those would be the main things that I would advocate for.
Love it, love it. And I'm really happy that you brought this topic to. I'm very fortunate you brought it to my podcast, and of course, always, yeah. No, I agree. I don't think it's talked about enough. It. We always look at like maybe smaller productions, maybe like, oh, that will never happen on a smaller production. I think it's happened more. Yeah, yeah. I think it's more. Yeah, I think it would happen more, honestly, because of the lack of security or the lack of, like,
It's also this mentality of, we kind of need anything we have to do to get the shot. And I think with this kind of, see, I was also a child actor. I started acting in LA when I was 2.
Oh wow.
And I think there's a lot of kinds of abuse that don't get talked about as much. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens with child actors. I'm very fortunate. I did
Yeah.
not have
Like,
bad experiences as a child actor. I have friends who 100% did.
when you look at
Those
Corey
attitudes of,
Feldman, Corey Haim,
oh
like
my gosh, and not even
Lindsay
not
Lohan, like,
not even going to the sexual place, although that's horrific and
Yeah.
definitely does happen.
You're talking more so
Also,
mentally?
well, I mean, even things of like a kid getting to set and being told their parents both just died to get a crime scene out of them. And like that's traumatizing,
Yeah.
you know? And a lot of mental games get played to, like get a performance out of somebody. And so I think the conversation also has very much been about sexual assault, which it should be, and we need to be talking about that. But
But it's a lot
there's
deeper
a
than that.
lot of other things that go on, and just treating people with respect and as human beings. And I mean, even with kids, theoretically, I mean, yes, it's difficult sometimes working with children, and it's a different thing than working with an adult, but treat them as human beings who have some control over their acting abilities. And you know mental abuse is not the way to go for anyone. um and not to abuse your trust. I mean, like, I'm thinking of that Sharon Stone scene where in Basic Instinct,
Yeah.
where she was manipulated into that shot because she was blatantly lied to when she said she wasn't comfortable. And that's abuse. I mean, it's abuse in a lot of ways, and mental is one of them.
Yeah, and some people won't see it as abuse, but it's like, to me, like, you're abusing your power to lie to her and then her believe you, and it's, how do you live with that at the end of the day? That's how I mentioned it earlier about having a moral compass, or having a moral like, just having a moral high ground, or just like, I don't know how people can do things knowing that what they're asking for is kind of unethical. So
And I think it's so important that we have people that are thinking about these things and do care about them, because honestly, one of the most healing things is to then like go on another set and have somebody really care about you and really take care of you and earn your trust, and to emphasize that, like, yeah, not all people will do that. Like, that's one of the most healing experiences that somebody can have. So, that I think we all have a mandate to try to be that example for people.
awesome, awesome. Well, we are nearing the end of the episode. Ashley, I appreciate you hopping on here and discussing this, as I stated before. Yeah, really look forward to our next episode. And yeah, guys, I'm sure I will be obviously putting a disclaimer out of each episode, but specifically for this one, if you ever come across anything that you don't feel comfortable being a part of on set or auditions or anything like that, like, it's okay to voice that opinion. We're past the point, I feel like, of just, oh, out of sight, out of mind. No, if it's in sight, it should be on your mind, and it should be called out, and it should be said, like, hey, I don't like doing this. So but yeah, Ashley, thanks again for hopping on. Until next time, guys, thanks for listening. Once again, this is Where Is My Mind, a podcast about mental health and the arts. I'm host and producer of the podcast, Christopher Orangeo. All episodes will be available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, and Amazon Music. Once again, this is Chris Orangeo, and thank you for supporting.